Julien is an honorary associate professor at the University College London. Most recently, he was director of research at Element AI's London office with a focus on AI for good. Julien joined DeepMind in 2012 as an early employee. Since leaving DeepMind in 2016, he's been working with Amnesty International. Julien describes himself as a passionate, impact-driven scientist in machine learning and artificial intelligence. I saw a short video clip in which he said, and this is why I invited him, "We are building tremendously powerful algorithms and we have a responsibility to ensure how we apply them." So I knew I had to invite him. He will be focusing on AI for good with a question mark. Please welcome Julien to the stage.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone. So quick exchange of tech right there. So thank you very, very much, Dion, for inviting me here today. Sorry, Rubin? Slightly struggling to get, there you go, thank you. So I'm actually really psyched about, thank you. I'm really psyched about being here today. Most exciting for me is a Q&A because I have so many questions for you and I really hope to be able to benefit from your insight. So this is a talk I'm not going to give today. This is what I used to do for a living during my PhD, during my postdocs, and in some of my time at DeepMind. But today, instead of that, I will tell you a story. And like any good story, it has a start just when I left DeepMind. That was 2016. I spent 4 years there, was the fifth researcher there. Amazing team, a growth from 30 people to 400. I spent 2 years working on mechanisms of memory and algorithms, along with uncertainty in neural networks. And I spent the 2 other years also at DeepMind around, sorry, realized I forgot to put a timer down. You're gonna have to flag me when I run over. I spent then the first 2 years on algorithms, the second 2 years on co-creating the health research team, which especially is a part working on with Moorfields Eye Hospital on properly anonymized data. Because the idea for me is we've got all these really cool algorithms. How do we make sure they go actually not to play video games only, not to go only to fintech or to selling ads, but how do we put them where it matters? So I built this team at DeepMind from 1 to 10 persons and realized, hey, actually, there is even more impact to be had. By then, DeepMind had been acquired by Google. It was able to have even more fantastic brains, so it was even harder to leave fantastic colleagues. But I decided to take a plunge. And this was 3 years ago, and today is about how that went. You'll notice a question mark in AI for good because there is so much questions to be out there, and there is so much potential to get it wrong. I'm a white male in my 30s. Trying to do good. You'll see some applications to Darfur. You'll see, yeah, there's a name for the pitfall I might fall in, white savior. My comms team at Element used to tell me not to say this word publicly. I am not at Element anymore as of 2 days ago, sadly, and that's part of the questions that are in the space, is how do we keep making that work? The Element AI for Good team, dedicated team, has been dissolved on Tuesday without notice. Yeah, so that's why bit of a rush for the slides and everything, but it's actually pretty exciting because it allows me to start a new venture and to be able to keep doing that this time with trying to get it right again from the get-go. And that's why I need all your input there. Now, let's jump in. As I left DeepMind, I bumped into a meetup on tech for good. There are many of these. And I bumped into Milena here. She's at Amnesty International. She's fantastic. She runs the decoders unit. Crowdsourcing platform. She puts big, difficult tasks like analyzing logs of oil spillage or analyzing the results of the actions by Amnesty through reports over 30 years and puts them online for anyone to contribute and give data and do a big task in small chunks for the good of the organization. She had this massive data on Darfur. So this, and again, I feel really weird explaining that to an audience of anthropologists who really know way more about it than I usually did before starting that. This is a tukul in Sudan, a typical hut made of wood, straw, and mud. You see them in villages like this in the desert, surrounded by straw fences. You see them, the problem is this. That's 2 Janjaweeds coming on horseback or jeep, setting fire to part of the village, raping the women, scattering the population to the wind. There's a long history in this conflict. It has been going on for 15 years. There's been a lot of press on it, and it went under the radar, but kept actually going. It's behind closed borders. Amnesty is working hard to shine a light on it, like many other organizations, and to gather evidence for potential legal actions after the fact. They're doing a fantastic job of qualitative studies, smuggling phone calls, getting survivors to speak, but they used to not do the quantitative part. This is where Milena stepped in, because as you can see here, the mark of a destroyed tukul is very visible from an aerial point of view. You see where I'm going with that. They had one satellite analyst, her name is Micah. She made some fantastic reports analyzing a few hundred square kilometers in the Jebel Mara area of satellite imagery, showing before and after pictures, saying, hey, look at the destruction here, this is what happened, you can't ignore it, and here is how it happened, with which frequency. So very dedicated analysis on one specific region. Problem is Micah is only one trained analyst. So what Milena and Micah set up is this crowdsourcing effort. Micah wrote a tutorial, and they put a website on for anyone to go, read the tutorial, and be shown a small part of Darfur and click where they see human presence. The first question is, how do we find the villages? There's no map of Darfur. How do we monitor them for destruction? Well, we need to find them first. And I bumped into Milena as they were starting that in this meetup and realized, oh, hold on. The same way, it doesn't take much of a machine learner to say the same way one expert trains a crowd. We can use a crowd to train an algorithm and move from, as you move from 100 to 1,000 square kilometers, move from 1,000 to continental scale. Now, this is what you would have seen in October 2016, early 2017. You'd log in there and just be shown this aerial image, 30 centimeters per pixel, and click where you see traces of a building. Gamified, made very interactive. Some people spent hours on that. I could talk for an hour about the work that went in there. There's some really interesting social aspects to it. Happy to answer that in the Q&A. But this is a tutorial you'd be seeing. This is what you're looking for: metallic roofs, line structures, cluster structures, shadows cast by the tukuls, conic shapes of the roofs. You're not looking for what's at the bottom, which is just trees and rocks, natural features. So different kind of color, different. A task that a human is really, really good at doing. Sadly, what you see a lot of is this. This is a destroyed village. You can see the different pattern. When there's no more roofs, the shadows are smaller. It's all kind of whack. Now, this is the result. I won't go through all the details of how we made it, but suffice to say, it was actually pretty simple. Standard computer vision algorithm that were just 1 or 2 years old, combined with a bit of JavaScript on top to be able to visualize properly. Now, this in green is what the decoders, the volunteers, have labeled. Every time they click, it means I see human presence here. This is a big town of Niala. It could be London, it could be Bristol, it could be anywhere. You can see here the metallic roofs, the grid pattern, the big square, the river in the middle. The humans also labeled this little shack here in the middle of the field, but also false positives. This is a field, but there's no human habitation there. Or this one here. There are rocks and trees, but no human habitation. They also labeled these kinds of things here, which is a village, a bit more remote, much fewer metallic roofs, but still very dense, with a lot of trees, because it's on one of the very few main roads in Darfur. And they labeled that in green all over the place. Now we trained our algorithm and applied it, and in red will be what it gives when we apply to the whole area. This is every single structure that we found in Darfur. And you can see the urbanization pattern, if I may call it. The village is in the middle of the desert with a safe zone around it that, and you'll be better judges, can mean there's close enough to the village to not have to build a hut. Very arid, quite different from these we've seen. But we've also flagged, or the algorithm flagged, isolated habitations like this next to cattle trails. And I say all that as a white male. I've never set foot in Africa. I think probably more of you have gone there than me. And then the question is obviously, how well does that generalize beyond just Darfur? So we applied it to Uganda, and when I saw that, my heart sank. I mean, there's nowhere there's a megalopolis here. Our algorithm just failed. Except that when we zoom in, all these little clusters is actually just actual huts, little clusters of huts all along the network of roads that crisscross this fertile region. Different place, different urban pattern, but the algorithm detects that nevertheless. Now that's all very nice and well. We did that with me part-time and a PhD student doing that on his night and weekends when he should have been writing his dissertation. But that led me to asking the question, okay, first, wow, we can get some stuff done here with just a few small team. What would it be if we had a whole team trying to help an organization like Amnesty? But more deeply, when I say AI for good, what does good mean? And what do I know about it? I'm a techie. I'm a mathematician. I can have opinions about how the world works, so does everyone at the pub. The same way I spent my career studying algorithms and trying to build bridges beyond that, there are people who spend their entire careers studying how societies work, how the different issues that we face can be solved, or more precisely, how we can try to solve them. What didn't work? What area to push in? Okay, let's empower this. The same way that when I worked with clinicians, I would be working, not bringing a tech and saying, hey, this tech is going to cure you. No, I ask a physician, I observe how he works, and together we devise where the tech can actually go. This is not, stand back, I'm going to save the world with AI. This is sadly a lot of what we see, but very much what we shouldn't do when we go towards defining good. So I want to empower the domain experts. There's this fantastic quote by Kentaro Toyama in his book Geek Heresy, which essentially says that tech is not a solution, it just magnifies human intent. You just get much more quickly to the top part, say the most rewarding part of the incentive and the reward mechanism that is in our society. Because with AI or with tech, you can actually accelerate how good you fit the curve. You might actually end up in completely extreme aspects that were not really thought through when we set collectively the incentives for our society. And that has really stuck with me. And again, this is why I really want to put this tech into the hands of those who actually spent a lot of time thinking about where our society is going. And we need people in the audience to be able to drive that. Now, this is a book. I really encourage you to buy it or to order it from the fantastic bookseller in the hallway. I've covered that already. What you don't want to do, though, when you empower them is this. This is a comic strip very popular amongst geeks called Xkcd. Give you 30 seconds to take it in. And sadly, this is very much what happens. You're swinging, and I'm going to save it with an algorithm. And you can add insult to injury by saying, well, no, I've tried. We really know it's hard. So that's the opposite of what you want to see. And sadly, this is what there is too much of in our tech community. So how does it go? I mean, there's a slight roadmap here from experience. And to many of you, it might seem actually completely obvious and common sense since you've studied how people work together. First, what is the path to concrete impact? We could go all into how to measure impact and what metrics are we going to put. And a lot of donation agencies actually require that. That's very interesting and sometimes needed, of course, but it can also be a kind of worms. So instead, as a technician, as a scientist, I go with the partners who already have a fantastic track record, which is, you can measure it or whatever, but you don't need to measure a building to know it's tall. So that will augment the probability that we get it right and that our project has an impact. Get rid of the hype, first and foremost. I should have started with that, actually. AI is just a bunch of algorithms. It's not the fantastic machine we might think they are or that the media talk about, because they hit a strong point in our common psyche. I'm not going to tell you how deeply rooted the idea of creating an artificial being in our own image is in every culture. So that's the first thing. These are stuff that we can do, there are stuff that we can't do, and there are stuff that we will be able to do at some point in the future, but we really need to research on. Again, avoiding the tech savior and the white savior syndrome. This slide is mostly done for tech people when I go and explain to them, hey, how can you be involved? Identify the right depths of test. You do not need a fancy neural network. At hackathon, I'll come back to hackathon in a minute, but at hackathon, Ruben from Oxfam came with a fantastic problem trying to match seeds to farmers in East Africa. And he said, well, no, actually, I realized, guys, this is not going to work. It's not a machine learning problem. I don't have millions of data points that you're talking about for your experiments. I only have a 100 or 200 data points. Yeah, let's do an Excel macro and match that by brute force. And we did an Excel macro and he walked away with a solution and he's super happy. Not everything needs AI. Not everything needs anything fancy. Identify the right depth. Which brings to the hard question for machine learning researchers. Are you coming here to solve the problem, or to help solve it actually? Or are you coming here just to illustrate your super fancy method? And there's nothing wrong with that. There is room for both. We need to show actually that the fancy methods can solve real problems completely. But let's just identify which interest is in each person's heart so that we can best align that. And then from the get-go, you need to plan about the scale and sustainability. Hackathons are great, but at the end of the hackathon, you put that on GitHub or on open source, you donate it to the community, and sadly, there's no way to pick it up after. GitHub can be the biggest cemetery of fantastic ideas. Let's not turn it into that. Let's plan ahead so that whatever comes out of these hackathons ideas, we can have mechanisms to scale them up. And that requires to go beyond research. Where are the engineers, the designers? And yes, by designers, I don't mean UX, UI. I mean, hey, the actual thinking, system thinking about how is that going to be used? How is that going to be misused? How does that answer any actual need? All of that needs to happen. That's what we were doing and starting to do in the AI for Good team at Element AI. I've been privileged to build a team of 12 people who are precisely working on that. And I'm actually thrilled to be able to continue that and find an even better vehicle. And it takes a village. That's the network that we built at Element, working with Amnesty, working with Human Rights Watch, Forensic Architecture, working with NASA Future Development Lab, Planet, working with Satellite Catapult, Global Witness. It takes a village to get these things working. My dream is to be able to get kind of consortiums model. Tech people, domain experts, funders, policy. It's actually more than a triangle, that's a square. Anyway, it's a kind of real, it takes a village to get these things done, and it's not going to be done in isolation by either of us. Now, another example of how that went then, fast forward year and a half, I had built a team, fantastic people, Laura and Freddie, who are actually now on the job market, so duping them on Twitter before I rehire them. This is Troll Patrol. This is again another project with Amnesty, where Amnesty has been doing this fantastic work, and especially Asmina and Milena have been doing this fantastic work for years around abuse against women on Twitter, and especially women politicians and journalists. Again, fantastic quantitative study, speaking with people who received abuse, studying it, amazing work by human rights researchers. We went in to help them bring the quantitative part and be able to say, here's the amount of abuse that goes in there. Trigger warning, there will be some really violent language in the next slides as I show examples of the tweets that are sent to these women. I'm not going to read them out loud. They don't deserve to be. You can see by yourself the kind of really insane stuff that is happening. I'm a white male on Twitter. I don't receive any of that. How can we find that? How can we help Amnesty study that? And I'm on purpose not saying, hey, how can we avoid that mistake? I'm just saying at this stage, how can we help human rights experts study that and help them study that mistake? And also study what tech can and cannot do. That's what we set out to do. Again, I'm not going to go into the detail of methodology, but again, the same idea from Milena's decoders unit, putting these tweets out there, preparing a data set, enriching it to avoid variance, but keeping important sampling weights to avoid the bias, and putting it in front of people who follow a tutorial about what is abuse, more precisely, how is abuse defined, how is problematic defined in the context of this study, so proper methodology, acknowledging that there might be variances between the graders depending on where they come from, taking that into account, and then doing a bunch of statistics, really, and then eventually, at the end of that, getting robust assessment of how much abuse there is, but also testing algorithms to see how good algorithms are detecting it. Spoiler alert, not great. They got about our algorithm slightly beat those from Google by a tiny percent. So yeah, the mathematician in me is all like, woohoo, we did it. Yeah, but we got 51% accuracy versus 50. So what this shows is that this kind of tech can be a helpful tool to help a human scale up his work, but it's definitely not a solution. And of course, when you say human do his work, that opens a whole can of worms of the lives that these graders, the professional moderators are having, and how do they face this amount of things that they have to flag. So it opens more questions that it answers, but at least it prevents going into the dead end of, oh, don't worry, we'll have an algorithm that solves all of that. And this is a really tricky thing. I mean, I know very little about human abuse. I know very little about the minefield of saying, hey, where do we censor it? Do we censor it at the point where it's emitted, or do we protect the victim at the risk of hiding the abusive tweets from the victim and putting her or him at risk? I mean, that I have no idea. I'm a tech guy. And now I'm not cowering and saying, oh, look, not my problem. No, on the contrary, I say, hey, I need to learn. And I want to learn with the people who have worked years on that. And it takes many types of expertise to get there. Now, the impact, and that's why I'm putting this example here, the impact was way beyond what we would have expected. No, we didn't solve abuse, sadly. Not where we're setting to do that. But we got a massive amount of media coverage. We released this report, joined with Amnesty, with a full statistical methodology on December 18th, 2018. Got in the Time, Bloomberg, MIT Tech Review, Wired, it got in China, it got translated in Greece, it got everywhere. There was hundreds of covering. Okay, great. Is that the impact? No. Media coverage is not an impact. It's a fantastic strategy by Amnesty to be able to get impact. They know their stuff. They know what they're doing. That's what happened. The night we release, the day after we release, Twitter stock plunged 13% overnight. $2.5 billion market cap erased, which analysts attributed to this report. Because the news was picked up, a financial analyst called Twitter the Harvey Weinstein of social media, that actually hit. Now, don't worry, if your pension is based on Twitter stocks, you're fine, they're recovered. And again, the aim here is not at all about destroying corporate value. I mean, politically, I'm slightly on the left of Che Guevara, but I did work for profit, and I know that we have to use the tools that are at our disposal. However, what this did do is it took the problem, and by a mix of tech and domain expertise, including how to get to visibility, this translated the problem of abuse into a unit of measurement that the decision makers at Twitter, their investors, their board, their executive, actually understand the bottom line of the company. That has not done anything magic. Twitter hasn't suddenly seen the light, but Jack Dorsey finally got a meeting with Kumi, the Director General of Amnesty. Since December, they've started to be a little more careful about how they approach these issues. They're starting collaborations with some academics. It's far from it. You don't want to give them a free pass. On the contrary, we need to keep doing more of this on all these issues to be able to get to keep the momentum going. And these are just two projects. It takes much more than projects to get to the scales we need. We want these kind of things to be done not through consulting, but through reusable tools, through products that any NGO, UN agency, certain part of certain governments, can tap into. That's the difference between consulting and product making. It's going to take a while to get there, but this is very much where I'm going. And why am I hopeful that this actually can work? You all have seen these kind of headlines. There has been quite a few. Employees writing open letters to their management against projects that are being brewed inside, whether it be censored web searches, whether it be applications for defense contracts, whether it be face recognition. There's this fantastic article by Kate Mex and Kate Conger from October last year, about a year ago, about summarizing. It said tech workers are asking, what are we doing that for? I mean, yes, they have mortgage, they have families, and yes, they are extremely privileged. Most of us are in tech, but there is this growing lack of comfort around the world that what we are building is enabling. I have seen in the team that I built, I have seen fantastic profiles coming to me and saying, well, actually, you know what, I could go to Google, but I want to work on this. And I was not paying Google rates, and I will not be paying Google rates. But the talent comes and wants to work on that. There is a real shift. It's generational. I mean, you get either older hats who have made their pile in tech and are able to take more risks. You have younger ones who say, well, screw that, you only get one life. I want to work on that. And you've got even younger ones. I mean, Dawn, you mentioned Greta Thunberg. I mean, this is quite an example. But again, as she said at the UN, let's not mistake her role as an activist and their role as scientists for the role of just saviors. They will be one part into the solution where so many of us need to chip in. There is a huge room for anthropologists, sociologists, many of you, to play in there. You know how societies work, or you might know, you research how societies work. You research how the dynamic between humans work. You know how to do field research. You think beyond the cool aspect of the algorithm. You know how to reach out to people who are developing these kind of algorithms. If you don't, I'm happy in the Q&A to suggest a few such ideas. And such a conference like today, thanks for setting that up, because this is just such a fantastic opportunity to do just that. Actually, I'm going to do an experiment here, if you don't mind. It's a question I used to ask to tech audiences. And I'm curious to see if the proportion of answers differs here. How many of you have heard about the fatal Uber crash in Arizona in March 2018? Raise your hand, please. All right, pretty much everyone. How many of you know where and what is happening to the driver now in 2019? Okay, so it's not just a tech thing. I've got one person. Pretty much, essentially, Uber is off the hook, and the driver, who indeed was watching TV on her phone at the time of the crash, is facing criminal charges. Now, the argument is, well, Uber just was making an algorithm. There's a safety driver here. She was watching her phone instead of driving. Well, yes, all true. Keep in mind, these safety drivers are just here to be behind the wheel and just in case something happens, but otherwise don't touch anything for hours and hours in a row. You know, usually doing something repetitive and just being there as a safekeeping mechanism, that's what we design machines for, not the other way around. We always talk about human in the loop. And I think, and I did mention it, you know, human in the loop here for abuse against women. This is fundamental. Yet at the same time, the flip side is a massive peril of, and this is not my idea, it's just a fantastic paper from 2016 by, and I'm sorry, I'm on 7 hours sleep today, actually over the last 3 days, so I can't remember her name, please Google her. It's called Moral Crumple Zones. Thank you, Madeleine Elish, thank you so much. Sorry, really long days. So Madeleine Elish, Moral Crumple Zone, 2016 paper about how we put the human in the loop and they become the ones who can take the blame, essentially. You know, as in a car crumple zone, you crash into a wall, part of the car is made to actually crumple and make sure that the rest of the car goes unscathed, ideally you. Now, we have a huge risk of doing the exact same, whether it be with a safety driver, whether it be with a moderator. There's a huge question of responsibility. If a decision is taken that goes wrong, who is responsible? The person who was the safety driver, the company that used the algorithm, the companies that designed the algorithm. Our software licenses are full of, our end-user license agreements are full of disclaimers, this software is provided as is without any warranty, etc., etc., etc. There's a long history of declining responsibility for what is going on. If your word processing software crashes and you lose your book, you can't sue Microsoft. Okay, that's one thing. But if your processor sends the police to the wrong place or sends innocents to jail or kills people by driving into them, yeah, we might want some accountability there. And again, these are more social questions which go way beyond just tech. So there is a lot of work to be done with AI, to use the words from Fred Abrahams from Human Rights Watch. There's work to be done with AI, where AI can help domain experts, but there's a huge work on AI, on how it affects our society, but also on the microcosm that is building these tools. Because one way to steer where AI is going will be to steer the community that is developing it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the Q&A.